Our first presenter today is Josh Miller with What's New in macOS LAPS. And without any further ado, welcome Josh Miller.
Hey Rusty, how are you?
I'm well. Thanks for joining us and presenting today on macOS LAPS. Feel free to share your slides.
Yep, I'm sharing them right now. Once we're good to go, as Rusty said, I'm Josh Miller, and today I will be talking to you about what's new in the macOS LAPS GitHub project. So, who am I? I'm Josh Miller. Some of you may know me. I'm on Slack at @jmiller. My GitHub is listed here at Joshua-d-miller, and my seldom updated blog, joshua-d-miller.com. So, let's talk about what is macOS LAPS. Well, LAPS stands for Local Administrator Password Solution, and has been available on Windows for quite a while and is deployed using a group policy. This is a Swift binary that will perform password rotation of a specified administrator account of your choice. It's fully customizable, which means that you can customize anything from how long the password is to the account that you would like to rotate, and as we see here, you can use it with your favorite MDM. Very easy to use. It's controlled by a launch daemon that will allow you to just have it run periodically on the machine if it's unable to contact Active Directory, or if you're running the local method and it sees that the password does not need updated, then it will just exit out gracefully. And best of all, it's open source. So this code is available on GitHub. Anybody can modify or make changes to it, or propose features, or even add new features to the code that can be incorporated. So why use macOS LAPS? Well, if you're like me, you want your local admin account to have its password rotated so that the password on each of those machines is unique versus, having the same admin password on multiple systems. It's really easy to look up the password in Active Directory or MDM, so even your Windows admins who are not, as familiar or even comfortable with macOS would be able to pull a password for a local administrator account without too much hassle. It also, one of the interesting things I've actually used it for is we have some users who like to test software, and it's actually quite nice to be able to say, we'll give you the administrative password that will be valid for, we'll say, an hour and a half. And once that time limit expires, since macOS LAPS runs every hour and a half, it would see that that password's expired and then rotate the password, thus giving your non-admin user a limited amount of time to use said password. And another one of my favorite things is you can be as simple or as complex with the password as you want to be, because sometimes, it's not fun typing all those crazy symbols or, having too many numbers in the password. So if you want to retrieve the LAPS password, I've actually written another application called LAPS for macOS, which is a utility that will allow you to pull Active Directory, will allow your macOS device that is bound to Active Directory to pull passwords from Active Directory. And that isn't limited to just macOS. You can pull those Windows passwords as well. You can expire a password immediately, or you can set a custom expiration. So as we were using our example earlier, you could say this password expires in an hour and a half, or maybe in 24 hours, or even in a couple days. The nice thing is we do have that credentials tab there. You can save privileged credentials that are able to pull passwords from Active Directory in your user keychain, so that you're able to utilize those credentials to pull the password as easily and effectively. So you don't have to open this up and run as admin or run as a privileged account. You just open the application, and as long as those credentials are saved in your keychain, you'll automatically use said credentials. Another fun fact, when you pull the password, as I'm sure many Windows admins will tell you, the LAPS admin utility for Windows, the font's not very nice, and it's sometimes hard to tell the difference between an I and a 1 and a pipe. So what we've done with this particular utility is changed it to a more easy to see and readable font. And as of a few months ago, this is now a universal application, so this can be run natively on M1 or on Intel macOS devices. So let's talk about configuring macOSLAPS. 3 simple steps. You install the package, configure the plist either via MDM or manually, and run the binary. So let's talk about installing the package. There is a package installer which you can download from my GitHub under releases. That is pre-packaged and signed with my developer ID certificate and hopefully soon notarized. And you can use your favorite deployment service or install it manually, but I would strongly advise using a deployment service. So you could use something like Monkey or Jamf, Workspace ONE, or even BigFix, and just deploy this package to the machine. So let's talk about setting up macOSLAPS and configuring that plist file. So there's 2 places that macOSLAPS will read its configuration from. Either library preferences under the edu.psu.macoslaps, or if you're using an MDM, it would be under library manage preferences edu.psu.macoslaps. If neither of these exist, then default values are going to be used, and unless your local admin account is actually called admin in all lowercase, it's most likely going to fail. So let's talk about setting up that plist, say if you don't have an MDM. I usually recommend using the defaults command. That way it's writing those preferences dynamically to the device. So you see here in this example, it's just a simple defaults write, library preferences, edu, psu, macOSLAPS, that local admin account key with your admin account there. Here, we're just setting how many days we want before the password is considered expired. So we're setting an expiration date of 25 days. Same type of command. Now, if you're using an MDM, you can configure these settings once and deploy them to any device that you want to utilize those settings. So you can upload it to, say, Jamf Pro or another MDM vendor. If you are using Jamf Pro, this web address here is a custom schema that allows you to upload said schema to Jamf, and it will give you kind of like drop-down menus and like kind of a nice GUI interface to configure macOSLAPS. As we said before, one of the keys you're probably definitely going to want to specify is that local admin account, because I have it on good authority that most people, their admin account is not called admin in lowercase. Here are the default values that are specified when we're using macOSLAPS. So as we went over before, the default account is admin in all lowercase. The default password length is 12 characters. The default expiration is 60 days. The only character removed by default is the apostrophe, the macOS apostrophe, not the Windows apostrophe. We do remove the keychain of said admin, and we are using Active Directory as our default method. So let's talk about customizing macOSLAPS for your environment. We went over local admin accounts. So this is just a short name for the account that you want to rotate. Days to expiration. This is a key of how many days that you want to wait until expiring the password. This is an integer, so you would just use something like 25 days or just 25 or 30 or 45 or 1, depending on your preference. Password length, another integer value. This is how long we want the generated password to be. I'm not aware of any limitation of how long it can be in Active Directory, but good rule of thumb, I would say maybe at least 15 to 20. Remove keychain, this is usually set to true because in my particular instance, we don't usually log into the local admin account unless we decide that we want to make changes, but we don't normally store anything in the admin's keychain. Remove pass characters. What this will do is exclude specific characters from being used in the password. So for instance, if you wanted to exclude, say, the @ symbol or the exclamation point or the pipe, you would just type those specific symbols in there. Exclusion sets would allow us to exclude an entire character set. So if you wanted your password to be all symbols, you would exclude letters and numbers. If you wanted your password to just be all letters, you could exclude numbers and symbols. Or if you just wanted to exclude symbols, you could just use symbols. And that's an array, so you can specify individual strings. So let's talk about secure token. So in macOS 10.13, with the introduction of APFS, any user who was administering file vault or making changes to encryption was given what is called a secure token. So that presented a slight issue for macOSLAPS, because in order to change an admin who may have a secure token's password, we have to know the old password for that particular admin, or we will be unable to move forward. So what we went ahead and introduced is what's called the first pass key. So what this is it's a string value that we'll say is kind of like a burner password, or a password you're going to use one time. It's going to be used to perform that first change for macOSLAPS. So when it runs the first time, it's not going to see that there's already been a password change done. So it's going to use that value from the configuration profile to pull and use for the first password. Once that's completed, the password that it is changed to is saved in the system keychain, and subsequent password changes are actually performed by loading that keychain item so that the password doesn't actually leave the device unless going to Active Directory or MDM. So in an Active Directory setting, one thing that I've seen happen is a lot of organizations have what's called a read-only domain controller. Well, we have a key called preferred DC. This allows you to specify a specific domain controller that we know is writable so that we can ensure the password change actually happens. I was under the impression that it is fully qualified domain name required. However, I have seen people configure it with the IP address, and I believe that works as well. So let's talk about sending the password to MDM. Our new method key, which is if you're using Active Directory, you don't have to specify this key, or if you'd like to be safe, you would just set it to AD. However, if you're in an environment where you don't have Active Directory, you would set this key to local with a capital L, which means that the password will only ever be recorded in the keychain item. So what that will mean is the password will stay on the device, and then what we will do to get the password is we will run this command. What this command will do, which is user local laps macOSLAPS -get password, it will write two files to the local file system under var root library application support. There'll be a file called macOSLAPS password and a file called macOSLAPS expiration. You could use the command line interface of, say, Jamf Pro or Workspace ONE to read the contents of those files and report those into extension attributes, or I believe they're called, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name that they're called in Workspace ONE, but basically a custom attribute in the said MDM with those values. Every time macOSLAPS runs, it checks to see if these files exist. If they do, they are removed. One thing I do recommend is if you are reading these, that you put in your extension attribute or custom attribute script to remove them once you have read them. A new feature, this is actually something that was sent to me as a pull request by, I'm hopefully saying this correctly, but Per Olofsson, that will allow us to group passwords. So what that means is, I'm not sure if you're familiar with iCloud Keychain, but when applications like Safari would generate passwords, they would kind of generate the passwords in like a group. Well, what we can do with macOSLAPS is you can define how many characters are in each group by using the password grouping key. So you could say you want 5 or 6 characters between each group. We can also define the password separator. Now the default's usually a dash, but if you wanted it to be an @ symbol or a pipe or a bracket or even a letter, technically you could do that. So here's a small example with a password length set to 12, password grouping set to 4, and a password separator set to dash. You can see that we got a password that Has some letters, some numbers, some symbols, and dashes. So now that we have macOSLAPS configured, we need to run the binary. Well, by default, if you've installed it using the package installer, there's a launch daemon put on the system that runs every 90 minutes as root. If you want to run it manually, you can invoke user local lapse macOSLAPS. Now this does have to be run as root because the binary does check to make sure that it is running as root, and if it is not, it actually will exit out because it needs to be able to perform that password change. You could use a script to call this, and if you decided you wanted to completely disregard the expiration date, there is a flag for macOSLAPS called -reset_password. If you need to see what version of macOSLAPS you're running, we have a simple flag for -version. Now this does not perform a password check. The only output you get when performing this is the actual version. Some bug fixes that we've done over the course of the last year or so. So there's some additional error checking for Active Directory. One thing I kind of ran into is, I thought about what happens if you change password locally and for whatever reason the device can't talk to Active Directory. So I've implemented a process that if that occurs, the binary will log that in the log file, and then it will actually revert to the previous password because we've loaded that into the binary, and then we will exit out. That way, preserving that admin account. Another wonderful contribution by Per Olofsson is what's called ISO date formatting. One thing I did not account for that I do now is international date formatting to make sure that we're using a date formatting that applies all over the world. And finally, certificate rotation. So there's a secondary binary now that is in the directory of user local lapse called macOSLAPS repair. What that will do and what it is specifically designed to do is to allow us to maintain access to the keychain entry. At this point, it cannot run without macOSLAPS running. If it's invoked manually, it will do nothing and exit. Its sole purpose is while macOSLAPS is running, if macOSLAPS is unable to access the keychain entry, this particular binary will be called to restore access so that we can continue with the password change. Big shout out to Joel Rennick and Mike Lynn for their advice and kind of talking me through coming up with this solution. So really appreciate that. So let's go through a quick demo. Not a whole lot here. So this is a device that the password's expired. I'm just calling sudo macOSLAPS. What you're seeing here is what's being logged as that's being run. This is written to a log file under /library/logs/macOSLAPS.log. You can see here that I do not have a preferred domain controller specified, so it keeps going. It has determined that the password has been expired, and it has detected a secure token, so it's performing a secure password change. You'll also see that there's a log here saying it's using the keychain item because this device has actually gone through the first password change. There is a log entry if the device detects that there is not a keychain entry, and it'll say it's using the configuration profile first pass setting. Once password change completes, there's a log file piece that says it's going to write it to Active Directory, and then a log entry for saying that the Active Directory writing that value to Active Directory has been complete. And finally, we remove the keychain for that local administrator. So now that we've performed our password change for this device, let's pull the password using the lapse for macOSLAPS, or lapse for macOS utility. So we go here, put in the computer name, click get password, and you'll see that we've pulled the new password with an expiration date of Friday, July 23rd at 3:39 p.m. Obviously, these passwords are no longer valid, but a great example. I also have implemented in this utility, you do not have to click the get password button. You can actually just hit enter, and it will perform the same function as clicking get password. There is the copy to clipboard button to easily copy that lapse password to your clipboard for pasting into an application window or prompt. And then obviously the expire password button that will immediately expire the password. Or you can click the expiration date itself, set an expiration, and then click expire password to set that expiration date in Active Directory. And with that, that's a pretty quick overview of what's new. I'm going to leave these links on here for a little bit just to kind of show these where you can get macOSLAPS, the Laps for macOS utility, and the macOSLAPS Jamf schema. And with that, I'm very happy to take any questions that anyone may have. So thank you very much.
Fantastic, Josh. Thank you. We can, if you camera want to get those slides, we're going to have those available later with those links. Certainly Google will help you get to the GitHub too. So here's our first question. Have you seen any issues using macOSLAPS with Nomad?
I have not. Now, however, in my environment, I am using macOSLAPS with Nomad and being bound to Active Directory, so I haven't had any issues there in particular.
Okay. So is the Jamf extension attribute for the password lapse in the GitHub?
It is not. I did put a quick and dirty script out in the macOSLAPS Slack channel on the MacAdmins Slack. I can grab that and put that out on my GitHub as well for access to those who need it. Or if you'd like to message me directly on the MacAdmins Slack, I'm happy to provide that to you.
Fantastic. What authentication is used to write the entry to Active Directory? Are systems bound? Do you specify credentials to pass it up to AD?
So the default when binding to Active Directory on macOS is it uses the computer account. The computer account has the ability to write the password, but it does not have the ability to read the password. It can read the expiration. So we just use the computer authentication in order to write that password to Active Directory.
Great. For locally stored passwords, if you had a Jamf extension attribute to check for the password, when the file gets removed by the launch agent, wouldn't the password blank out in Jamf after it checks for it again?
So yes, you are correct in that regard. That's where you would kind of set your Jamf extension attribute script to run the get password command, then read those files, and then remove those files.
Okay, all is one process. Great. What is the main benefit of macOSLAPS over, say, the ability in some MDM solutions to provide a random admin passwords that the MDM knows about?
So thank you for that question. In the beginning, when we wrote this utility, it was specifically for talking to Active Directory, and at that point, there didn't really seem to be a solution in MDM. I know a couple MDM solutions are developing their own kind of lapse solution built into the MDM, and obviously that's probably a better solution. But if you want to have more customization and kind of specify, lengths of passwords or the grouping that Pear provided, and I apologize for mispronouncing that, but yeah, I would say customization is probably the biggest feature of using this versus an MDM.
Okay. Will lapse changing the admin password cause any issues with File Vault?
Actually, no, because with the secure token piece and the first pass piece, that allows us to know the old password in order to change the password for the admin account. In order for secure token / File Vault to continue working properly, we do have to know that old password. So as long as we set the password to the admin account as the first pass in the config profile, subsequent password changes will be done via the keychain entry. Thus, we're always knowing that old password as we're rotating it, thus preserving access to File Vault and secure token.
Okay, awesome. So can you give us a little more explanation on how it's possible to use without AD on premises, or maybe without any Active Directory at all?
So that's the local method we've developed. Basically what that means is the password change, you'll still use it just like you would with the Active Directory method. We just have removed the ability in that method to write to AD. So you're depending on that keychain entry. So that's where the get password writes out to those files, and then say your MDM picks up said files and their values. So that'll allow you to run it without having a need for an MDM. Or I'm sorry,
so that
directory.
right, without an Active Directory. So that would allow for someone to utilize the Apple single sign-on extension attribute on a system, synchronize an AD password for a local user, but then have that administrative password that's also randomized, synchronized back to your MDM solution.
Correct. Correct.
Fantastic. Okay. Any issues with internal only Active Directory and work from home Macs? So what happens when you can't contact AD?
So basically, macOSLAPS will report in the log it's unable to contact a domain controller or any kind of way to talk to Active Directory and just exit out gracefully. It will wait till it's able to contact AD before performing that password change. In my environment, we kind of have like an always on VPN, so that is helpful, but I realize not every environment has that option.
Okay, fantastic. Well, it appears that is all of the questions we have for our first presentation today. So I'd like to thank you, Josh, again, for taking the time to deliver today's first session.
Thanks, appreciate it.